This is Duke University.
So here we are, kind of making the final turn. Want to say thank you again to everybody for coming, but certainly want to take the opportunity and just scanning the room, I could see that the cabinet members are probably scurrying in the hallway, kind of making sure everybody's coming in. But I do certainly want to publicly recognize, again, the cabinet for putting together this conference. This is something that is, as I said earlier, Fuqua is a student-run community. This is something that students ask for. And, I've had the opportunity to talk with not only students, but, our admissions committee, our dean, and they all get it. So we are integral to developing that Africa strategy here in terms of how do we contribute to a lot of the innovative thinking that was discussed today, but also how are we actually recruiting students from the continent. And so I think this certainly speaks to that. But again, to our cabinet that has really helped make all of this and everything we do kind of day-to-day a reality, wanted to say thank you to all of you. So now, as we come to almost a near close, wanted to introduce our new leadership, both Emmanuel and Anna. They'll talk a little bit more about the next year, and they'll introduce our closing keynote. So, Emma and Anna, give them a hand.
Okay. First of all, we just wanted to say a huge thank you to Brian as the conference chair. This is obviously our first Business in Africa conference at Fuqua, and I've really been blown away at the panelists we've had, at the participation we've had, and just the conversations that have come through. It really has been amazing. So thank you to Brian, and again to the whole cabinet for really pulling this off. It really has been great. Also, just to thank Idris and Leah, our outgoing presidents, for the amazing work and leadership that we've seen from them since coming to Fuqua. And both Emmanuel and I are really excited for where we see the club going. This year we've had meet and greet events in Uganda and Zimbabwe for the first time. Idris earlier spoke about the Spotlight on Africa events that we've had, and just really increasing the presence of Africa at Fuqua and Fuqua's presence on the continent. We're really excited about that, and a few other big events that we'll save for later. So, to Emmanuel.
Sure. All right, thanks everyone again for being here. And the whole idea is we want to continue this conversation beyond today. Continue this conversation into the evening, continue it into next year when we also come back around this time next year for the 2017 conference. And at this time, we're going to come back knowing what we've learned from today and trying to build on top of that to keep innovating and making it a very, very wonderful experience from each and every one. And with that said, I just want to reestablish what our mission is as a student body. So the Business in Africa Club here at Fuqua, we're all about educating not just the Fuqua students, but also the Duke community and the wider community outside of Duke about the economic and business opportunities in Africa. At the same time, we want to inspire each and every one of you and inspire everyone to be able to go back home, to be able to go home and actually take a place there to make the continent keep growing, keep developing. And that's the whole idea behind conferences like this, behind wonderful discussions we've had today. And with that said, we would like to transition to our ending keynote speaker. And I'm just going to read real quick his abbreviated bio. This was actually about 5 pages long, so I had to shorten it up. So our keynote speaker today, our closing keynote speaker today is Mthuli Ncube, Professor Mthuli Ncube, sorry. And he is from South Africa, and he's a professor of public policy at, Zimbabwe? My apologies, sorry. And he's a professor of public policy at Blavatnik School of Government, University of Oxford, where he teaches and researches in areas on macroeconomics, finance, development economics, political economy, health economics. He has a background in academia, banking, investments, and public policy. He also leads a multidisciplinary project on the economics of HIV. Professor Ncube also joined, he's also been part of the African Development Bank Group, where he was a chief economics and vice president. He's ranked as a top economic thinker on Africa and also globally. As a vice president and chief economist of the AFDB, the African Development Bank, he led the strategic thinking within the bank on development issues and directly supervised the development research, statistics, and capacity development and general knowledge management and strategy. Professor Ncube holds a PhD in economics, specifically within mathematical finance from University of Cambridge. He has been the Dean of the Faculty of Commerce, Law and Management, and also Dean and Professor of Finance at Wits Business School in South Africa. He was also a lecturer in with finance at the London School of Economics. Professor Ncube also is also on the Global Agenda Council of the World Economic Forum, specifically with focus on poverty and economic development, and on the Advisory Council for World Economic Forum on Sustainable Infrastructure. He is also a commissioner of the Lancet Commission on Investing Health. With that said, I would like us to please give a round of applause for Professor Mthuli Ncube.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. I'm pleased to be back here at Duke. I was last here a few in 2008 when I was still the Dean of Wits Business School. I was invited by Dean Breeden and Blair Shepard, who was head of executive education then. And we started a program for training managers in South Africa, a joint program with Wits. So I'm delighted to be back here. It feels like home. In fact, one of your former MBA students, former now, Martin Ganda, invited me, I think 3 years ago, to be a part of this when it started, and I couldn't come because I had to go to Rwanda, you know. The boss then, Donald Kaberuka is from Rwanda, my boss in the African Development Bank. So when he says go to Rwanda, you go to Rwanda, you know. So I couldn't come to Fuqua. But thank you for inviting me, and I think that the topic you've chosen on reinvigorating innovation and leadership in Africa is the right one right now. I think more reinvigorating leadership than innovation, in my view. I think innovation is taking place anyway. If you listen to any of the panels, there's a lot going on. We just need the leadership to support it going forward. But also I think that we need to reflect on what's going on in Africa. I must say that I'm one of those who have been really at the forefront of the Africa Rising story. I spent a lot of energy, at least when I was at the African Development Bank, promoting Africa and so forth. And I still believe that Africa's trajectory is still, on the rising part, not on the falling part. A few things have happened. One has been the end of the commodity super cycle. So that's a big problem for the oil-producing countries, copper-producing countries. The other has been a disease, which has, got a very kind of negative, image for countries that were affected in West Africa. But even then, that year when Ebola hit Sierra Leone, we had predicted a growth rate of 14% in GDP, 14%, probably the highest in the world. Even with the decimation by Ebola, it dropped to 7%, still one of the highest in the world. So anyway, it just shows you that even a disease couldn't stop the Africa Rising story. Of course, the other thing that is hurting the Africa Rising story in terms of the narrative is leadership. A few third terms and constitution changes here and there, Burundi, Rwanda. It's hurting the governance story a bit, but not too much. I think if you ask me if Rwanda needs a Kagame, I will tell you yes. I think I will support a third term in Rwanda. For a good reason. So I'm still very bullish about Africa, you can tell. And what's been troubling me as a strong Africanist is how can the Africa Rising story be sustained? How can we sustain this 5% rate of growth per annum that we've seen in the last 10 years? What is required? And clearly, innovation and leadership, which is the subject of your conference here, are key, absolutely. The first order of business in creating conditions for sustaining the Africa story, in my view, is the politics. The political economy is very, very important. So some of these third terms, especially by bad leadership, is not a good idea. It's as simple that. In some countries, it's a good idea where the leadership has demonstrated a track record. There's still work to be done in building social cohesion like Rwanda, one is much more sympathetic. But the politics is very critical in terms of playing an enabling environment for innovation to take place. But also, it's interesting that there are some counterfactuals, I tell you. If you look at some of the literature on why M-Pesa grew so fast in Kenya, people would tell that it's because of the social strife after that election in 2007. 2007. I think I got that right. Yeah, that's right. And then you look at the right now, the very speedy adoption of mobile banking in Zimbabwe is got to do with the demise of the domestic currency, right? Hyperinflation and all of that. If you look at the speedy adoption of mobile banking in Cote d'Ivoire, it's got to do with the political strife that you saw about 5-7 years ago. So it's amazing how actually instability can also cause a very fast technology adoption, because it's the solution. People are mobile, they are insecure, but they still want to transact. So sometimes a bad government, not necessarily a bad thing for technology adoption, which is a counter-intuitive. In fact, M-Pesa, by the way, failed in South Africa. It says something about trying to introduce a technology that is designed to deal with financial inclusion in an environment where you already have quite a bit of inclusion. So it failed because that's one of the reasons why it failed, actually. But the other was regulatory, and I'll come to that in a moment. So to repeat, politics is very important. The political economy is very important in pushing innovation forward. I've studied all the elections in Africa since 1960, all of them. I know who won, who lost, was it violent, was it contested, why it was contested, and so forth and so forth. I've written quite a lot, and I do get excited. You can see the academic me using game theory to understand how these politicians behave. And it's key that the elections tend to be the point of inflection for political risk in Africa, and really Africa needs to work out how to manage and make things smooth in order not to create the wrong environment for investors. But the second thing that needs to happen is regulatory capacity. It needs to be improved. It needs to be scaled up in Africa. I've just written on and been researching on the regulation of mobile banking in Africa. I'm happy to share the report that I've just written on that. Before I came here, I was in Kenya presenting the report on creating the right regulatory environment for mobile banking. Now, the first order of business is that the regulator must initially stay away, let the innovators get on with it, and so forth, but then come back. So what happened in Kenya was the Kenya Central Bank gave a letter of no objection to Safaricom and Equity Bank. They kind of looked away and said, carry on, we'll catch, and then they caught up with them because they could see the importance of introducing the technology in order to deepen financial inclusion. But also the regulator deliberately adopted a financial inclusion objective in the central banking function. Some of you who do a bit of economics, central banking is about what? Price stability, inflation targeting, payment stability is the other thing. The third thing that they did was financial inclusion. So 3 objectives in terms of central banking monetary policy objective function, and that helps a lot. And Zimbabwe has just done that. They've just expanded the objective function of central bank to include financial inclusion, and that's what you need if you want to support innovation in mobile banking. The other thing that needs to be dealt with is what you call interoperability. Those of you who work in this space know what I mean, which is that anyone using a mobile payment system with one operator or to be able to transact with someone who's using another, who's working with another mobile company. So that's very important, interoperability. It's not ordained, it has to be worked at. You can't quite legislate it, but you can use moral suasion to get that going. It's also important to allow for easy market entry and also exit. You need to create a level playing field, a competition for innovation to take place. This will lower the final prices to the consumers, as well as introduce efficiency in the system. One thing that I think is in thinking about regulation, we've really refined, and I'm glad we've done this, is that when you regulate such innovations such as mobile banking, you don't regulate institutions, you regulate services. So the first order of business is define those services. Make sure that you understand what is a payment service, what is a store value service. And those are different. So a payment service is regulated through payment law or through the Banking Act or something like that. And store value also similarly, but differently. But store value also means that you have to think about depositor insurance, because in cases of failure of an institution, the depositor ought to be insured. So there's a lot going on the store value space, but be clear on the services. So regardless of the institution providing those services, you regulate the services equally. What you call equitable regulation of equivalent services for the same level of risk. That's a bit of a mouthful, but that's what we do in this business. The other thing that is creating headwinds, by the way, for mobile banking is the whole anti-money laundering thing and the anti-terrorism financing requirements from the high-level panel, which came into being a few years ago. The KYC and the anti-money laundering rules are inhibiting the speed of adoption of mobile payments for international remittances. So they're coming in the way of that. And we have to figure out a way around that. Companies are beginning to work a way around that, but those two things are standing in the way of progress. So I wanted to just flag that. Again, coming back to regulating services as opposed to institutions, something is going on in Kenya. What has happened is that Equity Bank has now moved into telecoms. Right? So basically, they're going to be offering telephony services on the back of their virtual customer base. Absolutely. So who's going to regulate them? It's not this Kenya Central Bank. It's going to be the telecoms regulator, regulating a bank. But of course, they've had to set up a special purpose vehicle to handle that kind of service to their customers. So again, I'm just using that as a way to really emphasize that you are seeing this migration back and forth, and you ought to focus on the service rather than the institution. MTN in Nigeria, that was very interesting. The fine and all of that, I hope they resolve that. It is not very helpful, I think, for the sector in Africa, certainly not for foreign direct investment in Nigeria. I have to say that I've got a lot of Nigerian friends. I hope I won't walk away from here with a lot of enemies. I'm not in agreement with the trajectory of economic policy making in Nigeria right now. I think that it is taking Nigeria 20 years back. Please do not try to fix the Naira. It's a bad idea. What is happening now is that the parallel market for the Naira will keep growing. What you call the parallel market premium between the official and the parallel rate is going to grow. And by the way, don't think that by fixing the Naira you are controlling inflation. You are not, because inflation is being governed by the parallel market rate. So what's happening, because if you're going to target a currency, then you have to defend it. So if you're defending it, you have to run down your foreign reserves. So it's not surprising that the Nigerian foreign reserves have dropped from something like $48 billion under Governor Sanusi, who did a great job. He's a friend of mine, so I have to declare interest. Great guy, yeah? And now down to below 30 billion. Please, let the Naira be your shock absorber for global shocks. Let it depreciate. Let it converge with the parallel market rate. If you are worried about the inflation hitting the poor, then you need to develop your social protection program to give a good cushion to the poor. That's how you do this. So I had to say that, because again, it's important that when we think about an enabling economic policy environment, we're doing the right thing. And I think that we don't want 170 million people to be slowed down. There's so much energy in Nigeria. It's incredible. I just love it. But I think that economic policy making is not going the right way. Now, let me carry on this regulation and then the environment. Just a few words about the energy sector, renewable energy, which I was just listening to a panel here, a fantastic panel on that having a very clear PPP policy, public-private policy partnership, is very helpful. You know, one of my favorite renewable projects is the Cabiolica wind farm in Cape Verde. Fabulous project, fabulous. And what was really an enabler was that the government really understood how that PPPs were very important. They had clear legislation. We came behind it as the African Development Bank to support them. European Investment Bank and others came in, you know, a wonderful PPP arrangement. And I'd like to see really Cape Verde, you know, source almost 100% of electricity from wind, because they've got that potential. It's not easy to get, you know, hydro in there. It just isn't there. no other forms. They're just stuck. It's an island. So, well, I mean, as we can expect. So, but PPP policy is very critical. Also, at the bank, one thing that I developed is what we call inclusive infrastructure. To give an example, so if we're investing in power generation, we make sure that we invest in transmission. You need that. Generation and transmission go together. Then energies like wind, solar and others, they really will only succeed if there's enough transmission capacity. So it's very important to invest in transmission if you want also your renewables to reach the end users. Africa has something like what? A $50 billion gap in funding for infrastructure. And that figure is real. It's actually $50 billion goes unfunded in terms of infrastructure. And the question is, how do you get funding for that? In the last panel, there's something that really I liked, which is, and I've been thinking about this, is the use of securitization in attracting private sector capital. You actually almost need a mortgage-based security revolution in infrastructure in Africa if you're going to get capital in there. That's what is required. And I think that half the time what you want is to be able to issue some kind of debt instrument, infrastructure bond type instrument for funding to come through. So we need a hungry investment banker in between who can structure things and make sure that the pension fund monies globally and in Africa can find their way into African infrastructure. And you can start with opportunities around project expansion. So the project is already running, it's got a track record, revenues coming in, you can create an escrow account on the back of the instrument that they've issued. So that can be done before you go into the kind of greenfield stuff. Yeah. One of the interesting projects, by the way, that we invested in was this solar farm, the Noor complex in Morocco. Some of you, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's an incredible project, probably the largest in the world, I think, in terms of a solar energy complex near the city of Ozazat. Very interesting. You can read about it. You know, it's fabulous. We also put money in the geothermal project in Kenya. That's also another renewable project that we invest in. But I must say that really, at the end of the day, what drives all of these projects is this PPP arrangement. That must be very clear as part of the environment of sustaining the innovation in the energy space. If I can say something about women in entrepreneurship, now I found it really valuable, whether looking at women or other excluded groups in entrepreneurship. I found it valuable that we should always think of how to create entrepreneurship ecosystems. So when I was at the FDB, I spent a lot of time thinking about that really at the end of the day, it's about giving people business skills, training them, making sure they can do business plans. The plans are bankable, but the most critical stage was to make sure that there is an incubation service. They can be incubated, where they can plug in, and then also making sure that they are mentors who also mentor these entrepreneurs. And then you've got the financiers also plugged into the incubator. So thinking about an entrepreneurship ecosystem is really one way to bring in more more participation from any excluded groups in infrastructure and women being such group. In fact, the bank I was also helped develop with the gender policy for the bank, right? And one of the things I said was, at the end of the day, there are so many communities in Africa that bar women from inheriting assets, entrepreneurship assets. I can't change that overnight. So what we have to do as a bank is to make sure that whatever big projects we invest in, we have to check how many projects that are run by, or SMEs that are run by women, how many they're going to procure from, right? So whether if it's a hotel project, the cleaning services, we procure that from a female-led SME. So it was actually my job to enforce that. And I knew exactly how to do it. And the way you do it when the project starts using the quality entry assessment. So before the project goes to the board, all the private sector projects, I had to sign them off and check that that's being done. Yeah? And then it goes to the board. And then when I go to the board, prepare a one-pager for the board and say, look, these are the boxes you need to tick. And one of those boxes had to do with promoting women-led businesses. Yeah? So it can be done. It can be done. And then the trick is now, if you've ever worked in any of these World Bank, AFDB, the monitoring and evaluation department's jobs is to check that the initial targets are being met. So if you say that we're going to empower 80 business led by women at the beginning of the project, and we put money into it, we want to know that in year 3 you're on target for that 80. So we check. And that is fed back into the system. So there are ways to enforce this. Another issue where I think the government can be more helpful is the idea of technology parks. I visit a few of them. I visited a few of them in South Africa. The Innovation Hub in Pretoria has been very successful. Konza City, I think in Kenya, will be very successful. There are many smaller ones scattered all over the place in Tunisia. In fact, I supported the one in Tunisia quite a bit because that was my hometown for 5 years when I worked at the African Development Bank in Tunis. So there's so many innovation parks, and there's a whole map that you can take a look at, which is the World Bank has just produced. I also, a few years ago, wrote a small book called Silicon Kenya. Not Silicon Kenya. Look for that book, small book like that. Yeah, it's on the African Development Bank website, where again I try to document this. This is important. And here let me give an experience that I've had. I've been doing a small investments in the tech space, and I've done 4 investments. All the 4 investments I've done in South Africa, I all sourced them through the technology park in Pretoria. So one place has produced, at least for me, and I hope those investments make money, by the way. In fact, let me say a few words about them if you think that's worth listening to. One of them is basically a platform for selling mutual funds to the low-income groups. It's called Shabam. And then the other is a virtual medical aid card system, again targeting the bottom of the pyramid. And then the other is more events management, not even finance, the events management system. What's interesting about the event management system is that it uses the iBeacon technology, which is, as you know, is cheaper than your mobile phone. So all localized, cheaper, within 300 meters. You can access information through the smartphone. At events, so if you're walking through here, for instance, it could have beamed this event and told you what is happening at this moment in this hall, and a small Google map of Fuqua and how to get here from the door, so which is not too difficult. So I'm just giving examples, but the punchline is that it's not really about the project, that I managed to access them from one source, which is the tech park that has been created in Pretoria. So the moral of the story is that governments must invest in tech parks, in my view. There is some value, and that's one of the things that need to be done to sustain the innovation that you are seeing in Africa. I noticed that in the write-up for the concept note for the topic, you also talked about innovative policies. So I'm just going to mention one innovative policy. It actually blew me away when I experienced it. And it's not even high tech, it's actually low tech. Culturally sensitive policy making. That's what I'm going to call it. A few years ago, we started, after the Rwanda genocide, what happened was these assets were decimated. People were decimated. So clearly, and that's a cattle-owning country. So cows were decimated. Certain people have no cows, they're poor and so forth. So we said, hang on, maybe the thing to do is to give each poor family one cow, one female cow, right? And then you've got one bull roaming around. There's a family that I visited after literally 5 years of running the program that now has had 5 cows out of the one that was initially given to this family. And so it's now 5 cows. And I'll explain what's going on with those 5 cows. But the program, the way it works, is that once there are 2 female cows after the family has received the initial 1 cow, they must pass on the second cow to the next poor family. Right? That's part of the construction. So, but what has worked out is that out of these 5 cows, this lady, she has 3 children. She's now single because her husband died from HIV. She's HIV positive herself, but she's making enough income from the 5 cows, from the milk and from the manure. She can afford to send her children to school. That's what you call an asset-oriented social protection program. That's serious policy innovation. In the next few years, it's going to impact 500,000 households across Rwanda. It's called the Giringa program. There's one thing that really I like about that is that what you're doing, you're taking something like cattle ownership, which the Rwandans are very proud of, and turning that into a poverty alleviation program in a very impactful way, in a very game-changing way. I recall when the Tuaregs issue in northern Mali started, when Mali blew up a few years ago. My first reaction was, we need an asset-backed social protection program. Why are the Tuaregs so mobile? Maybe they are going around looking for water. So the one thing we should do as African Development Bank is go and sink 1,000 boreholes so they stop moving. Yeah. So I think we did sink a few boreholes, but I haven't gone back to check if that idea worked or not. That's policy innovation to assist with these kind of social protection challenges. Another policy innovation which is very interesting, because earlier there was a debate about how we create jobs and so forth, is what we are seeing in Ethiopia on the issue of structural transformation, where the government is deliberately gone out to China to look for companies that are specialists in transforming certain resources that Ethiopia is endowed with. So one of them is cattle and cattle hide, and turning that into shoes. So this company, Huanjin, and I know the managing director very well, a very really smart lady. So basically, they're now making shoes in Ethiopia in partnership with locals, having been invited by the government, and they're exporting shoes to the US. So some of the shoes you are buying are actually made in Ethiopia. And they're now insisting that they must say made in Ethiopia. And what I've noticed that the productivity of Ethiopian workers is now about 90% of the productivity of the Chinese workers back in China in the same company. So there's no issue of productivity. People's skills can be upgraded. They're employing 1,000 Ethiopians. It has really changed the game in shoemaking, in my view, in Ethiopia. And we're beginning to see some countries begin to think, hang on, that's how you revive manufacturing in Africa. That's how you do value addition. That's how you get into global value chains. So other countries are beginning to think in a similar way. But the trick, by the way, is understanding what your resource endowment is as a country and how you can then beneficiate or move up the global value chain in terms of that resource. I want to leave time for some questions and discussion. So maybe let me talk about maybe two things. Maybe two things on data collection. I was listening carefully during the panel discussion regarding collection of data. Mobile generates so much data. What are we going to do about it? How do we collect it? At the African Development Bank, I tried. So I launched what you call the African Information Highway. Basically, initially, what I did was I connected something like 45 statistics bureaus to a hub at the bank. It still works up to today, so that at least officials, when they collect data domestically, they can, upload. There's a format. It's all there. And the next phase was then to speak to the mobile telephony companies and then connect them to the same hub and be able to put all this data together, clean it up, collect it, and it's all a public good. So I wanted to say that perhaps at the end of the day, while you want to make money out of all of this data from innovation, there's also a way in which this data is a public good as well. It's also a public good. And I think that platforms like such as the African Development Bank can be used for collecting this data. The World Bank has a similar system. It's an open data system. And again, in both systems, I know that mobile bank-based data is missing. So there's a great opportunity to, again, pull in that data into those platforms. Now, so colleagues, to summarize, it's very important that policymaking must support Africa's innovation drive. Growth drive must support the Africa Rising story. It is my view that the story is still bright. We're just going through a small blip with commodities and so forth. Leadership, it will come right. But with these few words on the environment for sustaining the vision for Africa, I think that's what really needs to be done on the regulatory front, political front, and other areas of policy innovation. Finally, I've done quite a bit of work on what Africa will look like in 50 years' time. I can talk a bit about that as well, but let me stop here for now. Happy to take questions. I'll take 3 at a time. Yeah. Mandla, yes. At least I know Mandla, so.
Yeah, so thanks for your talk on, obviously reinvigorating Africa. But we've just gone through, or we're in the middle of going through a very rough period in most African economies, as you are aware. And the more I look at it, the more I realize that very few of us understood that this would happen so quickly, and it would last so long and would be so deep into a crisis. What can be done in future to maybe help predict these sort of things, or to alleviate the effects of these global shocks? Because these are not shocks caused by Africa, they come from the external shocks. But I'm pretty sure there's something that we can do about it.
Some of them are domestic shocks. All right, thank you. I'll take a second question. It's just more efficient for me, yeah. From Balloon.
Okay. So, Professor, thank you so much for a great presentation. You mentioned about public-private partnership, especially one successful example on the wind sector. And I was wondering what you think are, from your experience, are the important elements in terms of PPP, and especially as official from the AFDB, when you are working with the private sector, what are the things that you think are important in term to make sure that the product is successful?
Okay. Third one? Yeah, then I'll answer, then I'll take the next three.
Thank you, Professor. I have two questions, unfortunately. The first one is about your talk about politics when you started. And I figured for some African countries, there's a conflict between freedom and development, which is the case of Paul Kagame, where the pro-Paul Kagame's will prefer development. Is there a way to blend the two, where people could, at least at the top, people complain that there's no freedom? Is there a way to blend the two? And also my second question is about, I've heard a few people say that the new colonial masters on the continent are the NGOs that took over after IMF and the World Bank made some structural adjustment programs that didn't favor some governments very well. My question is what do you think about that? Are they the new colonial masters? Or because some of the decisions they make actually just change society in terms of how they dictate who they help and who they don't help. Thank you.
Yep. Let me take those three, then we'll move to the next three. On the Africa story and how vulnerable some of these economies are and how we've all been surprised. But I'm not surprised by the impact of the commodity story. But what we couldn't see is how low, for instance, the oil price would fall. Frankly, I didn't expect to see it at 40. I thought more like 60, 70, but $40 per barrel is a real shock. It's a real shock. I think I recall being at the World Economic Forum a few years ago, and the former Prime Minister of the Republic of China in Tianjin, and he started explaining the Chinese model of growth, and we should have listened a lot more closely, which was, he said, look, China has no choice. It has to move from an export-oriented model to a more inward-looking, domestic demand-driven model, and will support our SME sector, a la Keiretsu, Japanese style, and so forth and so forth. That should have been the turning point. That should have told us that, hang on, something is going to happen to the commodity story, which has been driven by this model of China. Things are going to change. We didn't listen. We didn't expect it, and here we are. Frankly, I've just been shocked by how Nigeria, Angola, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, Chad, even Zambia, they've all been impacted by the commodities market. And then also, Amanda, how little these countries, how much they've done in terms of diversifying their economies. In fact, they've done very little, absolutely very, very little. Nigeria tried to push towards agriculture, still trying, but it was not enough. But very little was done in managing the revenues from these natural resources to finance a diversification of the economy. In terms of predicting these shocks, we are saying that some of them are global. They are global. Actually, I've just produced a book on global shocks into South Africa 2 weeks ago. But also, it's also about how the countries then respond to those shocks. Again, to use Nigeria, as I say, I hope I don't walk out of here with a lot of Nigerian enemies. Like Nigeria so much. The response to global shocks is not to raise interest rates in Nigeria, or indeed to raise interest rates in South Africa. What's required is softer monetary policy. They should leave interest rates as they are. Yeah, absolutely. You get into monetary policy easing, that's how you respond. So you're right that initially these shocks are external, maybe unpredictable, but also the policy response when your country is under attack, is shocked, is also just as crucial, and it has to be done the right way. Of course, the reaction of most government is to create a sense of being in control. You are not in control. It's an external shock. What you should do is find the right shock absorbers to absorb it, and then cushion the poor who will be impacted negatively in terms of poverty or income distribution issues. So maybe we should just do better modeling of these economies, Mandla. It's just not easy. On the elements for a successful PPP, I mean, there's a way in which you craft these things. Absolutely, first of all, it's just the legal framework of the country. It must be well understood in terms of protection of property rights, the rights of foreign investors, because most of them are going to be foreign. The whole issue of the law around giving out concessions, how long those concessions to be, 25 years, 30 years, and what type of PPP options are available, whether it's BOT, BOR, all that must be enshrined in your PPP law or regulations. But also the rules for exit from the PPP should be clear. How does the private sector exit? But of course, it's defined by whether it's a BOT or BOR, or upfront. So that must be very clear. So think of all the, I think the elements of things that could be enshrined in a PPP environment. Everything in them must be very clear and must be, governed by the rule of law and respect for property rights in that country. It's not easy to also predict force majeure, situations. Again, to go back to Mali, one of my favorite projects was a sugar project in Makala. Anyone from Mali here? Going? No one from Mali. Okay. So great sugar project, a PPP between the government and the private sector. The private sector operator was the Lovo Sugar in South Africa. And I remember arguing passionately that while we've got this big sugar project, project must be inclusive. So we make sure that there were smallholder farmers who were part of the procurement process, feeding, growing sugarcane, supplying the big factory, the big project. And this project was going to produce sugar, ethanol, electricity, an amazing project. But guess what happened? When the political turmoil, broke out, the project just shut down. Force majeure. Yeah, you can't predict that. So even if you've got good PPP laws, Balum, you're not going to do much about force majeure. Yeah. On the politics, NGOs, the new colonial masters and so forth. Well, you know what? I think sometimes we are too harsh on the NGOs. They do play a role. I look at what I call fragile countries, for instance. In Africa, we know which ones these are. Governments are really struggling with meeting the budgets. They could have huge budget deficits if they were to try to fund everything. They would be heavily borrowed, and really the gap is being met by the non-governmental organizations and bilateral donor funding as well. So there is a resource gap that some of the NGOs are filling. Of course, some of them are more activist in terms of politics. They are funding civil society organizations. Is that necessarily a bad thing? I don't know either, because governments have to be held to account, and if the electorate is weak, governments getting away with things. So civil society funded by NGOs tend to fill that space and strengthen the opposition. That is not to say all NGOs are okay, but there's a role that they play. If the country doesn't want them, it can disallow them, absolutely, because every country has laws. You cannot run an NGO without a permission. Some government has to give you permission. So governments always have the right to withdraw that permission or not to allow them to come in the first place. So perhaps they're not necessarily the new colonialists, but I think they are more of a positive force than a negative force. That's my verdict. Yeah. Tarun, yeah.
I wanted to ask you to talk about the relationship of the African continents with India and China.
India and China.
And, of course, both countries have enormous business interests in the continent. But do you see that as a potential threat to some African nations' sovereignty or the internal business landscape?
Very good. I can't read your name, but I think it's Andrew.
Just a quick follow-on to Solomon's question. I am interested in hearing your perspective on freedom versus economic development, and perhaps how democracy versus non-democratic systems can either accelerate or hinder economic development.
Yeah, I think I didn't answer that question actually. Let me take a third one still from this side, then I'm going to switch. I must remember to switch to the right. Anyone?
So my question is, you mentioned the $50 billion gap
Yeah,
infrastructure. I just wanted to know what benchmark was that value actually attributed to?
Okay. How did we get to that figure? Yeah, okay. Fabulous. Okay, let me have a go at those. The China, India, in Africa story, how that is being viewed. It's quite clear that the strategies for investment or interaction between China and Africa or India and Africa are different. They are different. China has a much stronger top-down approach. As you know, China basically built the African Union buildings in Addis Ababa, you know, so they are in there, boy, they know how to do this. So top down, and you also know that a lot of the investors from China are actually state owned, or they are related to the state, so that government to government relations are quite strong. The approach tends to be governance neutral, which means that just go in and do your business, don't interfere in the politics, don't have a view the local politics. I know that model has been criticized, you know, but I have a view about that. On India, India's approach has been different. India has not been as strong with the kind of top-down approach. But I must say that both countries, there's some similarities that they do have a long political history with the governments in Africa. In fact, I must actually come back to China when I say that more strongly. Especially in Southern and East Africa, do not underestimate the impact of the liberation movements. That period really made sure that China and Russia got heavily embedded in the psyche of the people. It's easy for a Chinese person to walk into any of the countries in Southern Africa that went through a liberation phase, because people just haven't forgotten that support, or indeed a Russian person to do that. Those are the facts on the ground. And people in the West then get surprised, say, oh, why is it so easy for the Chinese? That relationship goes back to the late 1960s. Those are the facts. You remember Tazara railway line? Do you remember that? Yeah. My friend from Zambia, yeah, Elliot, they know about that. So these are all relationships. And India, also, if you look at the people of Indian nationality have settled in Africa. The second largest population of people from India is in Durban. It's in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. The impact on East Africa, you know, has been phenomenal. But also that's also the difference between India and China, that India, there are generations of Indian nationals on the ground who have also made the connection with India as the country and a conduit of business and relationships as well. So the approaches, the models are different. But look, as an analyst, as someone who comes from the continent, I actually welcome India and China's engagement with Africa. It just gives Africa another source of capital. Besides, India and China are investing everywhere in the world. So why not in Africa? You know, the largest foreign investor in Brazil is China. And Tata Steel just saved British Steel, but of course until yesterday, because the steel market has collapsed because of the Chinese, and Tata is pulling out of the UK. China is going to build a nuclear power station in the UK with permission of the UK government, and they deal with the government. So these are countries that are investing everywhere, all over the world, and Africa must have their money as well. Yeah. Now the freedom and development. Look, both are important. Definitely freedom. If we can get both, that would be fabulous. But also, what you don't want is a semblance of freedom when there's no freedom. You have elections, but they're absolutely meaningless. the quality of elections are always rigged and all of that. But quite clearly, you need both. Freedom and development are key. My point about Rwanda was that this is a little bit, I know. I think that Rwanda is still going through a lot of the pain from the past. I think it just needs more time to build social cohesion. And I think, in my view, I think the one thing that should be done in Rwanda is exactly that. You spend time building social cohesion, but then at the end of the day, democracy must be allowed to operate, and the political space has to be opened up. But I just feel that there's a lot of time, the building social cohesion is necessary. I also look at a country like Cote d'Ivoire. I think that the leadership in Cote d'Ivoire should spend a lot of time building social cohesion. I don't think that is happening fast enough. It's my personal view. I'm sure Ivorians in the room will disagree vigorously, but the legal I know is that that needs to be done. On the 50 billion gap, we've done a lot of work on this in estimating this gap. You see the infrastructure that the amount of investment required in Africa per annum on the current level of economic growth is about $100 billion a year. At the moment, if you take whatever the countries are investing, foreign investors are investing, AFDB, World Bank, it's about 50 billion. So the other 50 billion goes unfunded. There's just a funding gap. And that's on the back of the current economic growth, you know? So that's a huge gap. And the biggest gap is in the power sector. That's where the shoe pinches. I created an infrastructure index for Africa. If you go into the AFDB website, where I use it to track the level of development of infrastructure in each country. I must say that the one sector where we've not seen a lot of progress is in the water and sanitation infrastructure. Maybe because that's the most difficult to commercialize. I think it's an issue of working out a business model around water and sanitation. The moment you say water and sanitation, a lot of people think, no, it's not infrastructure, it's the social sector, but it's actually infrastructure. At the moment, I think we need to wake up and then we start putting more money into that. But anyway, we're pretty scientific about that figure. And by the way, that gap, we've also worked it out. I ran some econometric models to show that gap of 50 billion is actually shaving off about 2.5% of GDP growth of Africa per annum. So in other words, if it were to happen, Africa's growth could increase by another 2.5%. Right? Yes.
I don't know if this is working. My name is Megan McCurry. I live and work in Nairobi, Kenya, trying to do actually macroeconomic development in water sanitation in the form of sanitary pads.
Right.
And what's interesting is for sanitary pads, the finished products have no duty or taxes, but the raw materials have taxes. So there are actually international policies that have kind of been imposed into local governments to allow importation at the expense of local macroeconomic development.
Right.
And some of this is the World Trade Organization and other big organizations. And yet, America here only developed because of protectionist policies. And so we can have all the NGOs we want, we can have all the businesses we want, but until we are actually able to have protectionist policies for African countries, I surmise that we're going to have some limitations, and I wanted to ask your opinion about that. And as a second prong to that, we're seeing a real massive degradation of the environment over the last 20 years, real acceleration of deforestation, acceleration of wildlife poaching. That's a real threat to the macroeconomic development of countries, as well as basic things like water. The Ogiek in the Mau Forest, for example, the first time this year had no honey for Christmas. And that's important because that's the main water catchment area. So how do you see the interplay between environmental policies and business policies?
Okay. Go ahead. Is it Carol? You ready?
About bitcoins for Africa, you know what I'm saying?
Sorry?
Bitcoins in Africa.
Bitcoins?
Yeah, because I realize it, you know what I'm saying, because in Africa, it's a dictatorship. And I think as Africans, if we move to Bitcoins, I think it can work for Africa because nobody controls us. We can do whatever we want to do.
I agree with that. Absolutely.
I mean, what do you think? I mean,
Yes, I'll come. Yeah, a question here.
Thanks. Professor, in reference to the Lancet Commission's 2035 plan for universal health coverage, what do you think needs to be done on a policy standpoint for Africa to get to that point by 2035?
Okay. Was that three? I'll take a fourth one. Maybe I have to keep going. I'm looking at the time and thinking, let me take all of them. Maybe they also overlap. So there was someone there. Uh-huh. Or should I come back? Where's the mic? Carry on. Oh, go ahead. I didn't realize. I apologize.
Thank you. My question is, she mentioned something about the protectionist policies. I had a similar question about the protectionist tendencies in the big European markets, for example, the European Union, and even here in the US, where they do not open their gates for especially agricultural products from Africa, where there's a massive production. Like if you look at flowers, for example, they need a lot of certification, even food. They have a lot of procedures, and some people blame these sort of protectionist policies from blocking this from their markets, sort of maybe to support their farmers. But I think leaving out these guys out of the market is costing us a lot, because what they require is very expensive for the farmers to meet their requirements. Even the companies that would certify, for example, a product is not based in Africa or anywhere.
Okay. So I don't know who's next. I'm going to stick with this side.
Okay, thank you. I think towards the end of your presentation, you were going to make a prediction about Africa in 50 years. I'd like a 10-year, 20-year, and 50 plan for Africa based on what we know now and what you think can go wrong.
I need another hour for that, I can tell you.
and also, I guess, related to that, what should the diaspora role be in that? Because as I said to a few friends here, we come here, we get energized, we go home thinking we're going to change everything, and 2 months down the line we start waiting for the next conference to get energized again. So thank you.
Right. Yeah, over there.
Technologies and innovations in Africa.
Mobile technology.
Medical.
Oh, medical technology.
Yeah. So there's like a huge gap between the medical system in Africa and countries like the United States. For instance, when Ebola was raging through like Sierra Leone, we saw us turning towards like Western countries to develop vaccines, etc. What do you think will get us to the point where we are able to fully develop our own medical technologies and improve the health system as a whole? Thank you.
Right. I think let me switch back to Eddie Bright at the back. Your hand has been up for a while.
I was just curious to hear your thoughts or comments on the importance and role of the Lebanese merchant network in Africa. I think that's something that's not often discussed, and they're probably an important stakeholder as well, similar to how we've been discussing about the NGOs and the Chinese and the Indians.
Right. I think we often forget the Lebanese, which has been positive. Maybe the last one, I'm just thinking. Right at the back. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Uzoma Yogu. You mentioned that instabilities are causing technological adaptation, and so the continent is kind of leapfrogging infrastructure that the West had to have in place beforehand. Is this a sustainable way down the line? Because you even said in South Africa, when they tried to bring in the mobile payment system, it didn't work because that infrastructure was already existing. So I want to know, down the line in Kenya, where they've adopted a lot of these processes, are they going to be sustainable?
Yeah. Last. Okay.
Okay, so I heard a lot of questions on the sort of healthcare market and from a public health background. So my question is kind of just generalizing all those questions that have been asked and kind of like wondering that the African kind of government isn't trying to approaching for a universal healthcare, but without sort of like very sufficient capacity. And then on the other side, that there is private sector. A lot of people are doing that for out-of-pocket payment, and innovations and technologies are trying to fill the gap. And some of the investors are saying that to bypass government, talk to customers directly, and some are saying that to build capacity as government. So I was wondering, in terms of healthcare, so I was wondering from your perspective, what is sort of the future look like for the healthcare market in Africa?
If I can just, try to deal with those in 4 minutes, I like that. It's a lot of questions. Let me just the questions around protectionism. Africa has already gone through a protectionist phase. In fact, if you look at we went through that import substitution phase at the end of the 70s up to mid 80s. That was our kind of protectionist phase, all right? And then after that, we moved on to more open, structural adjustment policies to open up the markets. I must say that if you look at what has delivered growth in Africa in the last 20 years, it is actually the policies of opening up the economies. That's what has actually delivered growth. But my view is that as long as you make sure that the local entrepreneurs can also have a skin in the game, be investors, support them in whatever they're trying to do. That's really what you're trying to protect. You want to make sure that locals can participate, they can create jobs. I'm not really worried about protecting local industries as such, as long as in fact, what you find is that the people who are importing stuff into those countries is also the locals. But then that ends up deindustrializing the country. But my view is openness, and I don't believe in tariffs. So certainly tariffs in Europe against or US against African agricultural products and so forth. That's not a good idea. It is certainly holding back our exports into those markets. But also I look at it and say, what is Africa exporting? It's mainly raw agricultural products. That's also not a good idea. We need to beneficiate. And once you move up the global value chain, protectionism is less of a challenge. So really the answer in the long run is not worrying about protectionist policies in the US or Europe, in my view, is about how to move up the value chain where there's less protectionism and there's more money to make. On the Bitcoins, I must say that I'm quite excited about this Bitcoin potential and the way it presents opportunities for working around impediments and poor government, poor regulation. Maybe there's an opportunity. I haven't fully studied the entire potential, I must say, but at least in the simple payment space, it gets around some of the impediments for remittances from the diaspora into Africa, for example. So I think that there's a bit going on here, and more work needs to be done to understand the full potential. But certainly it is a way to get around some of the regulatory impediments to innovation and progress, frankly. On the Lancet Commission, I enjoyed being a commissioner with Lawrence Summers because he was the chair for this. Obviously, Africa has to invest in healthcare. You asked about healthcare, and this is not an easy sector, by the way. And the thing to do is to figure out how to also attract the private sector into the sector. One of the projects that I'm very proud of is a private hospital that we funded in the Gambia. Again, all designed to improve, healthcare facilities in Africa. So bringing in the private sector is part of the solution to achieving at least the infrastructure so required to meet those 2030 goal, or indeed the UHC, Universal Healthcare Health Coverage goals. But it won't be easy for Africa to meet these UHC goals, or indeed the 2030 sustainable development goals. It won't be easy, but at least we can go some way in getting there. I look at the data that I've worked with in the last couple of years on the HIV space, that the amount of resources required in Kenya just for treatment of HIV alone over the next 35 years is 13% of GDP. It's a lot. Yeah, Malawi is crazy. That figure is more like 55% of GDP. Right? Uganda, it's about 35% of GDP. Zimbabwe is 29% of GDP. These are large numbers. That's just HIV only. So part of the trick about, I think, achieving universal health coverage in some of the 2030 goals is to figure out, I think, how to use the HIV delivery platforms to take care of the other diseases. Someone who's HIV positive, they might also have, cardiovascular challenges, kidney failure and all of that. So you find that now there's a very strong correlation between people on treatment for HIV with the incidence of non-communicable diseases, NCDs. So maybe there's a way in which those two systems should be matched. If you go to Uganda, for instance, the entire health sector budget is funded offshore, and the bulk of it abroad in terms by donors, and the bulk of it is around HIV. So can you imagine if you were to translate that into the entire health system? I think that's the way to go. That if you can leverage off the HIV delivery network, you could channel, you could upscale the entire health sector. Africa in the next 10, 20 years, really what I do there is to focus on the drivers of change over the next 10, 20, 50 years, what those drivers of change are. So basically it's the institutionalization, the politics and democracy, infrastructure investment, which you asked about, is a key driver, climate change, global trade, again moving up the value chain. The demographics, the fact that we are going to add another billion people in Africa is an incredible, most of which are going to be young, is a serious driver of innovation, of growth over the next 10 to 20 years. So really thinking about Africa forward, you must think about the drivers of change. That's how I think about it. Think of the drivers of change. And then as an investor, you want to think about investing in those drivers of change. So if one of the factors is demographics, how are you going to follow the demographics so that you can really realize a demographic dividend? It's about infrastructure. How are you going to get paid from investment in infrastructure? If it's about institutions and so forth, how are you going to make money out of service delivery systems? That's how you should think about it in terms of Africa going forward. Investment in the medical space, Ebola and so forth. Of course, it's not an easy sector. I've said a bit about it already. It's not an easy sector. Building systems. I look at all the work we've done in what we call fragile countries, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and so forth, and realize that it is not easy to build institutions. It's just not easy. It's just tough. And institutions around the health sector, we've just kept, we've just keep going here, and maybe one day we'll get there. But it's just not easy to build institutions. The role of the Lebanese community, we're fully aware, and I think that we've been. I think what has happened really was that the attention to India and China is because we kind of feel these are kind of new and recent entrants. Also, they've been rising economies, but not Lebanon, if you see what I mean. But the Lebanese community are really embedded in Africa already, and they've contributed so much. In fact, they are African. Those who are in Africa are actually already African. And really the interest in India and China was because you've got India as rising economies, China as rising economies. That's why there's been interest. But I can assure you that the Lebanese community has done a lot in West Africa and in Central Africa in the entrepreneurship space. The instability and technology adoption, you know what, I wasn't recommending that you need a lot of instability for us to get ahead with innovation. It's just a dreadful counterfactual that it does seem like instability in some cases has speeded up adoption, but people were just merely trying to cope with a terrible situation. If you cannot get to a bank because there's social strife in Ivory Coast, a mobile phone will help you, do some banking, if you see what I mean. So it's not something that I'm recommending, frankly. I'm just saying that it's just a terrible counterfactual to have. I've tried to touch on all the questions, and hopefully the answers are in the right direction. Yeah. Thank you very much.
If there are no other questions, we just wanted to thank you very, very much for coming. It's been an honor to have you here.
Fabulous, thank you.
And this is just a very small token of our appreciation. And for all of our guests here today, we just want to thank everyone for coming. And we'd like to invite you to join us for a cocktail in the faculty hall. I think there'll be cabinet members giving you directions there. But thank you again to all of our panelists, all of our participants here today. This has really been great, so thank you very much.
Absolutely.
And just briefly, we'd like to recognize the efforts of some alums. We'll start with Dove Gigi. Hi, Dove. He's from the Executive MBA. And then we also go to Rotimi Thomas. He was one of the early founders of Business in Africa Club. So we're building on a lot of this hard work from these individuals. So again, thanks to everyone. Unfortunately, all good things have to come to an end, but the discussion doesn't. So hopefully we take it from here to Faculty Hall and beyond, and into 2017 and into the 50-year projection we have for Africa. All right. Also, and we'll have some of our cabinet members outside. I will direct you towards Faculty Hall. And if you don't mind, I would like to everyone give yourselves a round of applause. You all have been fantastic. Thank you.